Hey everyone, welcome. We see Josh rubbing his hands together, cracking his
Yeah.
knuckles.
Is this
Really
thing
glad
on?
you're
Hello?
on. You're on. You're good. You're live. We're really glad you're here. I'm Lucy Hitz. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Pantheon. We're here because if you've been feeling a little exhausted by the AI conversation lately, meaning last month, last few years, you're in good company. We've got, the utopian promises, the doomer headlines, and especially in our industry, in our kind of neck of the woods, it can feel almost impossible to get a straight answer about what's actually happening, what it means for the work we do every day. And that's why we're having this conversation today. So no hype, no fear mongering, just a really candid, grounded look at what AI is genuinely changing in web and digital from what we've seen and what it isn't. And I'm joined by someone who's been thinking about this more carefully than almost anyone I know. We've had many, many hours at this point, probably worth of conversations about this. I'm Josh Koenig is co-founder and chief strategy officer at Pantheon. And he's been building on and for the web for over 2 decades. He's been pretty deliberate. We've been pretty deliberate, I think, about not adding to the noise here at Pantheon. So when he does have something to say, I think it's worth hearing. This is going to be a very conversational question format. If you have questions or something you'd like to say in the comments below, please do join in. And Josh, we're really glad to have you here.
Yeah. Thank you, Lucy. This is my first time ever going live on LinkedIn. So I love I like this. I think this is super cool. And yeah, just for those of you who don't know me, in addition to doing, Pantheon from the beginning, I actually had like another 15 years of a career on the internet and building the web before that. I was one of those people who started out as a very early digital native, and just built this up as the whole thing was rising. So have a lot of opinions, but I've kept them to myself for the most part. I've kind of been lurking in the AI chat that is the public conversation about this stuff for the past couple years. And still like following a bunch of things, using it myself, using it within Pantheon, enjoying actually a lot of stuff we can do now, but not feeling like I had anything important to contribute. And so, but as we started to see more things happen within our customer base, within our partners, things we started to observe ourselves, as we've seen things kind of maturing out there in the market, and both in terms of just what the market's doing, but also where the tools are at, it felt like it was time to kind of speak up, because I think there's some important stuff that it gets lost sometimes in the noise, in kind of the inevitable frenzy of a hype cycle. And I think there's a really important through line here to follow. And I'm happy to have this format to do it. And I wrote a little piece. We'll drop a link to that as part of this as well. Love to hear people's comments on the written version, but happy to just have a conversation about like, what does it mean to be realistic about this stuff in 2026?
Yeah, and just a plug for reading that. It's kind of like a white paper, but some of the best thinking and deepest thinking, I think, around this topic around. So please check it out. And I know you touched on this, Josh, but Pantheon has stayed pretty quiet as the AI hype has exploded. We've been using it a ton internally and obviously thinking about this topic very deeply. And when we think about, we feel like we finally have something to, really meaningful and actually useful to say. What is that moment? Like, what made this the right moment to say something?
Yeah, so I think, so first of all, we're, as a company, have always been grounded and really built on people who are doing the work and the practitioners and the market. And means that we're really connected to like, hey, what's real? What's authentic? What helps people lead better professional lives? What are people actually using, in service of their mission or their clients or whatever it is? And I got to be honest that like, up until late last year, that like a lot of it was like, it was all hypothetical. Not all hypothetical, but it was mostly hypothetical. It was a lot of this could do this, or this might do that, or if these trends continue, and it didn't feel like we really like it just didn't feel like a real conversation to have. Like it was and it was sorry, it was also the dominant conversation. Like it's a dominant conversation at like dinner parties in the suburbs where I live now. Like it's just like an omnipresent thing. But we didn't, it wasn't really real for us in terms of practitioners. And then I think that started to change late last year. And I think, sort of where we are now, the rubber is beginning to really meet the road. And I think it's time for us to get into this conversation. And I think, yeah, thanks for putting up one of my cool infographics. I think we've this quadrant where we want to be pragmatic and optimistic is like kind of tragically underrepresented right now in the conversation. Like the sort of the discourse online is driven mostly by the sort of debate or flame war between people who have the more maximalist utopian perspective and the people who are just like so over this hype cycle that they've become full-on haters. Like that's where the conflict is, and conflict creates drama and drama brings people in, but like at a certain point it's not very helpful. I think you've got people who are maximalizing and doomers, like they see the worst case scenario. That's not most people that are out there, but they grab headlines because they do crazy stuff. And so like this part of the conversation that's like, we're realists about this. Like this is not going away. This technology is with us for forever. And it has real applications, and it's honestly cool. And it's also not going to take over the world. Like that point of view is just really underrepresented right now. And I think the lack of that point of view being out there makes it harder for people to make decisions. I think it leaves more people feeling more anxiety and angst than they need to about what's going to happen. And I think, I think for us to make the most of this technology, we have to be much more, we need to be clear-eyed about it, and we got to lead the conversation about what it means to be clear-eyed about AI, and the time's now.
So Josh, one of the most interesting parts to me of the paper, and then the conversations we've had and some of the presentations you've given, is what does history have to teach us about where we are today in this moment, from how other technologies have progressed and ebbed and flowed. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. What does history have to teach us about where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, so they say history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. I like that phrase. And let me tell you about the rhyming. Because I started my career again, like at the run up of the .com boom. And it's actually really, this is not a novel observation, but it's one that I can make because, with the firsthand experience. It's uncanny how much the AI hype cycle resembles the original internet.com web hype cycle. You could look at it at a macro scale, like the amount of money being invested in data center infrastructure as a share of GDP is actually right about what the investment in like laying new fiber cable and building out network capacity was in the late 90s, like 95 to 2000. But like, I think to me, it's more the human side of that. And when I was starting my career, like I was a 19-year-old, I was a 21-year-old, I was like fully a believer and like just like evangelical in my conviction that the internet was going to change everything and it was going to be awesome, and we're be a part of it now. And it's really interesting to just observe that same energy as someone with like one foot in that world, but also one foot in the, okay, but let's be real, with AI. And I think back to some of the conversations that I had with people, because like in that early part of the internet bubble, like anybody could convince themselves that they were going to take over the world, because it's like, well, we're going to figure out how to do training and coaching through the internet. And if we really do that really well, then doesn't everything come down to education? And if we're the ones that educate people through the internet, then ... we're going to rule the world. Like this kind of like, and it's not, I don't mean in a megalomaniacal way, although some people certainly did. I mean in the sense that like people just can see a through line, maybe a hazy one, from what's happening right now to like tremendous success and impact. And the same thing is happening with AI. And this is this like the visual here is like the classic Gartner hype cycle where something happens, like the technology trigger, innovation breakthrough occurs, and then people get really excited and there's this run up of huge expectations, and then it always kind of comes back down to earth. And then you get like this like I don't love their terminology or the exact, I don't actually exactly agree with how the line is drawn, but the pattern is there. Like people kind of get real. What works today? What doesn't work yet? Let's keep working on making it better. Let's figure out how to apply it in a way that is like works for our businesses or that people enjoy, and then you become really productive with it. And honestly, in hindsight, the internet, the .com boom, like there's only a couple of companies that were in that peak of inflated expectations that actually mattered or lasted. Like most of the major internet, like the tech giants we think of today, they were sort of just building or hadn't even gotten started at the time that peak happened. They were the ones that found the real value. They were in the arena, but they weren't big names. Like there's like pets.com and cosmo.com and all these other things that like we're like, woo, we're so huge, but then they didn't end up being anything because the real value wasn't there. Whereas like, Google didn't go public until 2024. I was like, 2004, 2004, which was like 2 years after the bottom of the crash. And that's like, there's sort of something in there of like the way to do this is to build towards the enlightenment and productivity part of the curve, not try to ride the highest high of the hype cycle.
And then when we get into the innovation adoption curve, how does that sort of play into this? And then moving into kind of a concept you've thought a lot about, which is kind of smushing these two together in a way.
Yeah, totally. Like that's like it's a business mashup. It's cool. So this is the innovation curve. This is the other thing to think about. Like historically, this is another pattern where like you see things, and this has to do with who adopts technologies and how much of the market they represent. So there's always innovators. There's always people that are out there, pioneers on the cutting edge, doing great stuff. But as my colleague Steve Persh likes to say, on the cutting edge, there's a lot of bleeding. And so it's not for everyone. Right? Not everyone can innovate about everything all the time. And some people just aren't set up to be innovators. And, they know that about themselves. So it's like a pretty small part of the market, really influential because they're the ones that often trigger these kinds of excitement and innovation is a multiplier for everything, but it's a small segment of the market itself. And then you have the early adopters. And these are people who are technology enthusiasts. They're like tapped into what's going on. They have the freedom and the resources to try new things that aren't yet proven, and they're a really key part of any technology making it sort of over the hump. And Mr. Moore, who drew this graph like in the late 60s, I think, he said within the early adopter cohort there's this thing called the chasm, which is there are technologies where the innovators are all in, early adopters start to look into it, and then early adopters are kind of like, I don't know. And like they can't bring any of their friends from the early majority who are like that's like the bulk of the market is in the early and late majority, 70% of everybody. They can't bring anyone over, or they do, they show it to them and people are like, well, so what? Or how much does that cost again? Or like, what is the real use case for this? And that chasm is where technology innovations go to die. Right. Basically, you got the early excitement, but not enough to bring the early majority over. And you just sort of go to zero somewhere in the chasm. But if you cross the chasm, crossing the chasm is the famous paper about this. If you cross the chasm, then you're into the early majority. And then it's just a question of like who comes on first versus who is more conservative. And then who are the people that are really slow at the very end of any technology adoption wave. Still a significant part of the market. And they hang around forever, but they're the laggards. You put these two things together. Yes, exactly. And it's like, you could see it, right? It's like they're made to fit together because they're actually following a very similar story, and you can use this to see what happens. Like, it tells you the story of what happens to technologies that don't make it, right? Like metaverse, VR, right? This just happened. We have this technology innovation, which is like headsets that are affordable and actually pretty good. People get really excited about VR. We reach a peak of inflated expectations. I think in some ways uniquely turbocharged by everything going remote and people being very isolated in the pandemic. Zuckerberg rebrands his company and like lights $50 billion into this thing, and it goes to zero. They just wrote the whole thing off because the truth is there's not a giant market for like spending your whole day jacked into the matrix. Like, that's not what people really want to do. And the real world applications for this stuff are there, but they're not massive in the way that it was predicted. And so the chasm slash trough of disillusionment coincided in such a way for the metaverse that they pulled the plug effectively. I don't think that's happening to AI. I don't know anyone who does, right? Like the AI is gonna be with us forever. But I do think, when I think back to my time in the dot-com bubble and, thinking about where we are kind of riding out these patterns, there is going to be this roller coaster that we're on. And I think just understanding that that's part of the natural pattern for how technologies ripple through our society can be comforting. It can help us feel more grounded when everything, feels like it's on a roller coaster. Having that context, at least for me, it gives me some peace of mind to understand that all of this has happened before, all of this will happen again. And like, you can, this doesn't have like super strong predictive value about when specifically something will occur. I'm not trying to say we're at the top of the market now, or this is the bottom of the chasm. I'm just saying we're going to go through this together. This is what's happening.
And when we think about our neck of the woods, building the web ops, we're seeing kind of this real split emerge, like in terms of kind of bringing it to where we seem to be today, where AI is clearly winning and doing a great job for simple, low stakes web projects, and it's fun. And it can accelerate productivity with a lot of individual work and even, teamwork and even some cross teamwork. But what does that mean, in your experience from spending so much of your day talking to customers and in our community? What does that mean for professional web teams? And where does the vibe coding wave actually stop? How do you know you're there? What happens next? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So I think I will say this. Our industry is probably the most heavily and directly impacted by AI. And I'm going to get to your question about vibe coding in a second, but another important piece of context is because of the way AI is changing like what goes on with search and how people discover information, like the purpose of the web is changing in real time. And the purpose of what you put on the web is new expectations are being set. And that's like a fluid process that's happening right now. That shakes the foundational pillars of the whole web as an economy. And it means that the professionals in this space are already in this kind of uncertain zone. And then you have the fact that because one of the things that LLMs are objectively capable of doing, and in some cases quite good at, it's generating code. Generating code, and websites are code. So the way you make the purpose of the web is changing, and the way you make the web is changing simultaneously. And that's hard to handle. Like I think that's again for me part of why I wanted to write this and publish it was I think just acknowledging that this is hard to handle is important. Like, you can kind of feel like, is it just me? No, it's not just you. But also an important thing to keep in mind is we as professionals who build the web are like in like the hottest of hot spots for AI impact. And that can make it really easy to assume that everybody else must also be as impacted as we are. And that may not be true. And that's part of like, just going back to the previous thing of managing your own sense of expectations in terms of how how much impact this is going to make, how quickly in the broader world. But you asked about vibe coding, and I think that's like this is what's going on right now. Starting late last year, and accelerating this year, vibe coding, which for those of you who don't know means like asking chat to make you some software or a website and letting it do its thing, has become good enough that you can now vibe code into production. And you can tell this is happening because the number of websites that are online that don't have any detectable CMS framework or signature is rising for the first time in like, this chart goes back to only to January of 2015, but the trend goes back to like the aughts, right? What I'm talking about is that little tiny uptick at the end of the line, the green line. So visually it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's like actually hundreds of thousands of websites going live without any kind of detectable underlying technology or framework. And that's the result of the ability to generate code and generate a site, and it being good enough to put online. And the cases where it's good enough, you can see where it's starting to disrupt the market. The cases where it's good enough are simpler use cases. It's like a site that's mostly static that you don't have to keep updating. Because actually, to be honest, I don't know if any of you have tried this, like continuing to update a relatively complex thing by chatting with the best AI available is super frustrating. Because the way that the technology works is it like absorbs the whole thing into its context window, and when you're trying to fine tune, that's like it's not a good, like that's something that I think tool makers around AI are going to be working on improving, but it's going to take a while. And also the ability to like make the output something that humans can carry forward, like Anthropic's clearly trying to do that with Claude Design, and it's great that they are, but it's also very early days for their ability to deliver what people really need in a professional context with that tool. But vibe coding is on the rise. It's good enough for a lot of use cases. It's going into production now, and where that has a really big impact on our market and our teams, because the way you do this work, even if you're not pure vibe coding, right? If you're already a software professional, right, you should be using this technology at this point to see how it can help you, how it can accelerate what you do, how it can remove tedium and drudgery from your work life, how it can unlock new ways to collaborate and so forth. And that's kind of what's coming into focus now. Is we need a way, this is like our time to shine, because I have no doubt that AI is crossing the chasm, but there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that gets splatted in the market as we as we go down and bottom out. And I think for us, we need to build stuff that can kind of, this is our catchphrase, but I like it, that can go beyond the vibe, right? Because vibe coding is, it gives you this, it's a probabilistic system. So if you give a thing 3 sets of inputs, it's going to give you 3 different, maybe subtly different, but still different outputs every time. And it's hard to fine tune. It's hard to carry forward. The way that vibe coding works today, it's single player. It's just someone talking to chat. And like what real organizations need is something that can work for a team. And then, what actually delivers for a lot of these use cases that we're starting to see, and this is the pattern that we want to promote, is starting with a structured set of inputs. So you're not just saying make it up from whatever you like. You're giving the LLM, the agent, parameters around what it's supposed to use, giving it really structured criteria. So like this is all these people that are doing really interesting work around like defining requirements documents for agents. And like you can go into overkill here too. I think some people like think that if you just dump a ton of direction in, it's going to give you a more sophisticated output. Like quality matters more than quantity, but like clear direction, and then giving it specific criteria for what it needs to come out with. And the key thing that we're starting to see is looking at specific output criteria that then leave whatever artifact in a state that a team can continue to work with it going forward, where it's not just like the AI spit out this thing. Did it work? Okay, no, let's try it again. It's like, okay, the AI spit out its thing and it's like 80% there. Awesome. let's close that last mile and then run it forward. And then how do you make it so that AI can continue to be a part of the team, continue to help boost innovation going forward? Those are the problems that are being solved today. And that's where we're going to move from trust me, bro, I vibed it, to I have an agent that's like a part of my team that's helping me, work much more effectively than I did before.
Yeah. So I think a good, like, piggybacking on that, you know, bringing AI into an enterprise web team isn't really a tools problem. It's really an operating model problem. So when you take what's happening right now and the trends we're seeing, where do you see teams actually getting that transition right? What does this look like on a real world team? Because I think we are in a world where we're seeing a ton of vibe coding, then with stitched together tools to create a really good output on maybe a proof of concept or like one-off basis that then, to your point, can become rather complex to update or to kind of scale up. But what, like, how do we make that transition? How do we get that transition right from a both, almost like technical perspective, but also functional perspective?
Yeah, I think like a big part of this is actually, yeah, what you said, which is this is actually mostly not a technology problem at this point. It's a reconfiguration of how folks work and where their roles are. And there's technology and platforms involved in all that, and obviously we're working on this because that's our business. But I will be honest with you and say, like, it's not like there's going to be one, there's not, like, nobody's going to come out with a piece of software that fixes this, because we have to change the way we work in order to make the most of it. So there are certain things that we can say with some confidence are definitely a part of the recipe for the future. We know that having an established library of design components as an input for these things works and is necessary if you want to control brand and have some governance over that kind of stuff. We know that version control over the work that you're doing is a super important part of the process, as is being able to understand what came from a human and what came from an agent, and that's how you structure review of things and so forth. Once you have agentic code entering your equation, if you're not putting it under version control, you're gonna have problems. Like you're just gonna run into real trouble over time. We know that kind of what I said before, but I'll say it more explicitly. Tools that provide transparency into who wrote what are super important. And then we know that the like software that serves the web, the open source CMSs that we know and love, and others are bending themselves and evolving to become more friendly as output targets for AI. That's still, to be honest, it's still work in progress, but the direction there feels fairly clear, which is that, a lot of people would like to work through, maybe you work through one process, which is pure prototyping, and then you sort of do another process, which is, okay, now that we have our end state in mind a little bit better defined, we can try to get that into a system that has longevity, whether that's a CMS or a really structured approach to a front end that developers can carry forward with some API connections for content. There's a bunch of ways to solve that problem. And I think right now that's where the really interesting innovation is happening. The other thing that's super important is the change in roles, though. Like today, tons of web developers are in production. They're just doing production work all the time, and that's going to change. Like that's the work that really should be offloaded to agents, because they can do a lot of that work, and that work is pretty grindy, and so on and so forth. And so developers need to shift left into building and maintaining those tools. Designers maybe even actually need to shift a little bit right, because they're not just producing artifacts that they throw over the wall and say, here's my comp. They're involved in the dev process, because code is now democratized as a medium for people to express themselves. And then the people who are like creating content, they actually get to move all the way over to the right, because the tools that we want to give them should be so intuitive, not only just like with like cool draggy droppy zippy interfaces, but maybe also like an agentically enabled workflow that, like, what I kind of jokingly call the civilians of the team, the non-technical people, really can create the stuff themselves that goes into production, and they can sign off on it, and they can say, yeah, I did everything right, cool, let's launch it, and they don't have to go through like a specialist production team on an everyday basis. Like, those reconfigurations of people's roles are probably the most complicated things to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we probably should have a follow-up LinkedIn Live too about that transition for folks in our field, because it is such a drastic transition to how to think about, your career, what you're responsible for, how you
Oh,
connect
totally.
functionally. And I think definitely worth a follow-up conversation. I want to close us out with one final question, which is, if a web team fully leans into a grounded, realistic approach to AI this year, which I actually think our audience and our, the Pantheon user, so to speak, is uniquely positioned to do. If a web team fully leans into a grounded, realistic approach to AI this year, what does winning look like for them a year from now?
I mean, I think it means that you have felt real, durable gains in productivity without feeling like you opened a can of worms. Like, that's the ball game right now, because models hallucinate. I hate the word hallucinate because it implies that they're thinking, and they're not. But like, models are probabilistic systems. They will produce unpredictable outputs. And that's just how they work. There's no model that won't do that, because that's what LLMs are. However, with the right framework and the right process, you can effectively understand and mitigate that risk and get significant productivity gains, because they can turn things around really quickly and will work on whatever schedule you want and can be your real-time partner whenever you feel like getting something done, without, again, feeling like you have exposed yourself to undue risk. Like, there is a way to do this that we're beginning to see, where you actually get the best of all possible worlds. You're doing better quality work because your creative people are liberated, your technical people are liberated to be more innovative and creative. So your quality is going up. You're getting it done faster, like it's happening in less time, and it's less expensive, because the models make a bunch of the grind work really. We have to still sort out the unit economics, but even if they're like 3, 4, 5 times expensive as they are now, it's still like going to be really economically attractive for the grind. And so, like, you could break the iron triangle with this, right? Better, faster, cheaper is achievable. And I don't think every team's going to get there. There's a lot, again, the human sides of this are sometimes the most complicated things to sort out. But teams that win will have made progress across all 3 of these fronts. And that will feel really good to those teams. And we're here for it. That's what we're here to help people do.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for hopping on today, for being the Gandalf of the AI era for web developers. We have a link here that you can probably see on screen, but also we'll put it in the comments of wherever you're viewing this, so that you can check out the full white paper. And please tell us your thoughts. Tell us where you agree, where you disagree, where you have more to add, and keep the conversation going. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me, Lucy. Appreciate it.